I'm Gregor Thomson, I'm a philosopher and a writer, and I know what the meaning of life is. Welcome to The Struggle. This episode is brought to you by The Struggle newsletter. This is a weekly email newsletter that I send out for free every Sunday, a short article concerning the art of embracing productive struggle. And I also send out tips, strategies, and recommendations such as movies, music, podcasts, books, and recipes to help along the way. To sign up completely for free, go to gregorthomson.com, the link will be in the show notes, confirm your subscription, and check your spam folder for your welcome newsletter, and then add me to your contacts so that you can continue to receive it in your inbox every week for free. And that's it. You're on your way to being more productive, healthy, and motivated. Now, let's get on with the struggle. This is episode 16 of The Struggle with me, Gregor Thomson. Now, last week I discussed the story of the Buddha and the first two truths of the four Noble Truths of Buddhism. So if you haven't already done so, I would recommend watching or listening to episode 15 just to get a bit of context as to who the Buddha was and what the first two Noble Truths are. So this week I'm going to discuss the next Noble Truths, which are Nirodha and Magga. The third noble truth of Nirodha is the cessation of suffering. It's the cessation of dukkha. It's freedom from suffering through the cessation of thirst. Once this is achieved, only then can an individual achieve what the Buddhists call nirvana, the extinction and detachment of thirst. Some Buddhists believe that it is the extinction of desire, whereas I believe that in order to eliminate needless suffering, one must embrace suffering. One must desire struggle, and in this desire, one can be liberated from negative characteristics that plague our modern societies, such as greed, ignorance, arrogance, and laziness. After all, to struggle is to make efforts to break free from restriction. This liberation insinuates freedom. Contrary to popular belief, freedom is a negative state, as it is the absence of something. It's the absence of constraints, of imprisonment, of hatred, of ignorance, of greed. In this way, to embrace struggle is to become truly liberated from the constraints of what is holding you back. If you sit and binge watch television all day, you're not free. You are constrained and are imprisoned by your own mind. Whereas if you embrace struggle, you are liberated to be better, to reach your true potential. You accept your fears and are free to move forward regardless. This can only be achieved through true liberation of negative habits and desires. Where Buddhists believe that to be in a state of nirvana is to be truly free from desire, craving, hatred, and the illusion of the self, I believe that to be in a state of freedom is to work for it day in and day out, because pleasure can be achieved through nothing more than pressing a button, but success, fulfillment, and liberation are the best of life, and therefore can only be achieved through an equal amount of work and struggle. Freedom is the desire to be free, and thus we must desire to work for liberation. Freedom requires constant and consistent effort. It does not come free. It comes at a cost, and that cost must be paid for in effort. The fourth and last noble truth is Magga, or the path. It's the path that leads to the cessation of suffering, that leads to freedom. It's also known as the middle path because it avoids two extremes, one being the constant indulgence of pleasure and the other being the constant avoidance of pleasure. While Pola Rahula described this extreme in his book, What the Buddha Taught, as the self-mortification in different forms of asceticism. In other words, severe self-discipline and the avoidance of all forms of pleasure. So I'm not saying that you should be constantly struggling or you should be constantly working, and I'm also definitely not saying that you should be constantly indulging in pleasurable behaviors and pleasurable substances, just that you balance the two, because too many of us stray too far towards one extreme. That extreme most likely being the extreme of indulgence, because we are distracting ourselves from thinking about our lives, from aiming up, from being ambitious, because it's all too easy to indulge. But in order to be truly free, we must balance the two. We must enjoy life, but we must also work for it. As with most problems we face, the middle is the answer between the two extremes. This middle path is split into 8 categories that we can apply to achieve true freedom and fulfillment. These are right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Freedom from unnecessary suffering comes from the persistent efforts to balance these 8 categories of life. Nobody's perfect, and nobody can perfectly balance these forms of the middle path, but the attempt to balance these, the journey of effort, is the middle path. It is what the Buddhists call Magga. All 8 categories incorporate each other, so they are not to be followed chronologically, but rather simultaneously. They aim at promoting the essential aims of Buddhism, which are sila, or ethical conduct, samadhi, or mental discipline, and panna, or wisdom. So, to sum up, we must be aware of our thirst for pleasure. We can eliminate or conquer this thirst with the awareness of needless suffering and the embrace of the struggle. Only then can we eliminate needless but human characteristics such as greed and ignorance. The third noble truth of Nirodha is the cessation of needless suffering and the freedom from needless suffering. The fourth noble truth is Magga, which is the path we must take to freedom, and this comes from a concentration and balance of the 8 categories within the middle path. When we concentrate our efforts to perfect and balance these categories within our lives, we achieve what the Buddhists believe were the essential aims of life: ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom. This is a constant and never-ending journey, but freedom is achieved throughout this journey, and thus meaning is found within this path of struggle, the efforts we make to break free from restriction. The answer lies in the struggle, so keep on struggling. Just a few more things before you take off. Firstly, thank you for watching. It genuinely means a lot to see people viewing and liking the content. Second, if you're enjoying the content, please subscribe. It's the best way you can support the podcast. As you can probably tell, I don't have a team behind me helping with recording or editing the podcast. I don't have much fancy equipment, and I don't have much financial resources to keep the podcast going. So any support, any subscriber is helping the podcast grow and helping me more than you know. You can stay up to date with everything I'm doing on social media. All of the links will be in the show notes. And you can also listen to the Struggle podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And lastly, keep on struggling.